Here to introduce the Minister will be Dr. Stephen Webb. Dr. Stephen Webb is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the University of Saskatchewan's Global Institute for Food Security, or GIFS, which performs research to deliver transformative innovation to agriculture and food production in order to help feed the growing population in Canada and the world. Dr. Webb joined GIFS in 2019 following a 23-year career with Corteva Agriscience in the United States. His most recent role at Corteva was Research and Development Director of External Technology, where he led many research collaborations with private sector companies, research institutes, and universities around the globe. He also developed and deployed Corteva's external innovation partnership process for driving new products and technologies to accelerate innovation across the seed, crop protection, and digital platforms. Dr. Webb has over several hundred new he has partnered with several companies worldwide and has over 20 years of expertise in developing and managing multidisciplinary enterprises and new business opportunities. He has had a PhD in immunochemistry. He's done a master's degree in biochemistry and a Bachelor of Science degree in microbiology from the University of Guelph in Ontario. Fellow PAW attendees, I present to you Dr. Stephen Webb.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are at our important PAWS 2021 event. It's now my great pleasure to present the Honourable Minister Karina Gould, Minister of International Development with the Federal Government of Canada. Minister Gould will take part in a moderated discussion following her keynote address. The Honourable Karina Gould was first elected Member of Parliament for Burlington in 2015, and like we were talking about in the green room beforehand, it's a very short distance between where my parents are and her riding. A graduate of McGill University and the University of Oxford, Minister Gould is passionate about public service and international development. Before her election as Member of Parliament for Burlington, she worked as the Trade and Investment Specialist for the Mexican Trade Commission in Toronto, a consultant for the Migration and Development Program at the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C., and spent a year volunteering at an orphanage in Mexico. Minister Gould has deep roots in her hometown of Burlington, Ontario, and some in Guelph, actually, I found out, and is an active member of the community and advocate for women's issues and affordable housing. She has volunteered with and actively supports the Iraconia Bruce Trail Club. I struggled with that and I apologize. The Burlington chapter for the Canadian Federation of University Women, the Mississauga Furniture Bank, Halton Women's Place, and other local organizations. Minister Gould lives in Burlington with her husband Alberto and son Oliver. And with the birth of Oliver, Minister Gould became the first Canadian federal cabinet minister to have a baby while holding office. She is passionate about breaking down barriers for women, youth, and underrepresented groups. Welcome to the University of Saskatchewan and to the PAW 2021 conference, Minister Gould.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Webb, for that very generous introduction. And I have to say that I'm just thrilled to be with you, albeit virtually, at the University of Saskatchewan and in Saskatchewan today. But Dr. Webb, your background picture certainly makes us feel like we are all in Saskatchewan right now. I also just want to note before I get started that next week is International Development Week here in Canada. So let me start by giving a shout out to all of you here who, through your hard work and engagement, are helping us to go for the goals, the theme of this year's IDW campaign. So like many Canadians, I find inspiration in one of Saskatchewan's greatest humanitarians, Tommy Douglas, who said that the only test of our character that truly matters is how we look after the least fortunate among us. When it comes to international development, the way we do this is by empowering, partnering, cooperating, listening to, and learning from each other and those around the world. This way of working is in line with our global to local approach to development, an important theme for this conference. Global to local is also at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals, what all of us here call the SDGs. The goal of the 2030 Agenda is to eradicate extreme poverty and ensure that no one is left behind. The agenda inspires international cooperation across governments, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector, providing a framework for partnerships, including with and between countries in the Global South. It is a global agenda for action and positive change. Within this context, Canada collaborates to address long-term development challenges, respond to humanitarian crises, and promote peace, stability, and security. The 2030 Agenda focuses on the role of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. So let me say a few words about our Feminist International Assistance Policy, the compass that guides us forward. The policy is about identifying and transforming power dynamics. It means taking an intersectional, human rights-based approach, both in what we do and how we do it. It means concerted and intentional anti-racist action in our programming and processes. It means seeking out the most vulnerable and most marginalized people to support and listen to their voices. I'm happy to say that since we launched the policy in 2017, Canada has become the #1 OECD donor for gender equality and the leading donor globally for women's rights organizations and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health and rights. By next year, almost all, 95% of our bilateral international assistance will advance gender equality, and no less than half will be directed to sub-Saharan Africa. This has meant improving the lives of more than 97 million people through Canada's humanitarian assistance in 2018-19. Our feminist policy has also guided us through the current pandemic, which is exacerbating inequalities and threatening to reverse hard-won gains, especially for women and girls, refugees and displaced people, and LGBTQ2I individuals. Since last March, Canada has allocated over $1.1 billion in direct support to the global response to COVID-19. One example of this support is a project called Keeping Food Markets Working, which will contribute to food market continuity and protect key workers and food supply chains in Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. The Feminist International Assistance Policy also guides our efforts to harness the power of local partnerships to respond to the pandemic. Practically, this means approaching local communities as equals and collaborators, because the best solutions are found through listening, critically assessing our own attitudes and activities, and recognizing that we don't know everything. That is why it is a priority for Canada to reinforce and empower local and national actors, such as organizations led by women and refugees. This approach improves the effectiveness and efficiency of international assistance, while shifting power imbalances and helping dismantle systemic barriers to equality of opportunity. A powerful example of this is Canada's Women's Voice and Leadership Program, which supports women's rights organizations in 32 countries and regions. In Mozambique and Kenya, this program has helped local women's rights organizations to partner with women's legal aid associations and police and medical services to ensure women have access to justice and protection from violence. In Indonesia, village-level groups advocate to ensure that governance is gender responsive. And during the pandemic, the program has helped local women's organizations innovate to reach very marginalized women and girls, including those with disabilities, trans people, commercial sex workers, pastoralists, and Indigenous women. An essential part of Canada's international assistance is to support education, the foundation of any inclusive, sustainable, and just society. Over the past year, the pandemic has caused huge disruptions to learning and education systems around the world. In having schools closed down to limit the spread of the virus, children and young people have lost school as a safe space, and we have seen more gender-based violence, early and forced marriages, and child abuse. That is why I will continue to advocate for accessible education around the world. I will be speaking more in the coming days about education and what Canada will do to ensure refugee and forcibly displaced and host community children and youth get the education they need and deserve. Let me turn now to the important role universities play to engage, assess, and support good policy making. Global Affairs Canada has a long-standing relationship with Canadian universities in delivering assistance and deepening our understanding of international development challenges. Universities also help to ensure that Southern voices define priorities during these challenging times. Over the last decade, some 50 Canadian universities and institutes have received over $230 million in project funding on issues as diverse as primary and higher education, food security, sexual and reproductive health, climate and environment, labor market entry, and research and innovation. Some of these projects involve university-to-university collaboration, such as the University of Calgary's partnership with Mbarara University of Science and Technology in Uganda to work on issues of maternal, child, and sexual and reproductive health. We also work together to offer scholarships to students from the Global South. Through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, many university health research institutes and academic networks are contributing to the UN Research Roadmap for the COVID-19 recovery. The roadmap identifies 25 research priorities that will support an equitable recovery and progress towards the SDGs. Here at the University of Saskatchewan, our collaboration is yielding results. For example, with $16 million in support from Global Affairs Canada, the University of Saskatchewan, through the Mozambique Canada Maternal Health Project, is working with local communities, authorities, and institutions to tackle barriers that prevent women from accessing care. The University of Saskatchewan's Global Institute for Food Security and the Bangladesh Agricultural Research Council have engaged in a research and training partnership to help promote sustainable food security in that country. And I know that Steve Vischer will be sharing more about the great work we are doing together in a few minutes. So to conclude, Canada puts inclusion, gender equality, and local actors at the center of what we do. And we build partnerships to delivering on the SDGs so that no one gets left behind, even and especially during a pandemic. This means building from locally defined needs and priorities, increasing coordination across humanitarian, development, and peace-building efforts, and seizing opportunities to target the most persistent development and humanitarian challenges. I want to take a moment to recognize and appreciate the work all of you do. A vibrant and engaged civil society is fundamental to a well-functioning democracy. Our work together is essential to achieving a more peaceful, inclusive, equal, and sustainable world. A world where we look after each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Gould, for those thoughtful remarks, and in particular, the reminder that it's through partnerships, collaborations, and working together that we can create a better place. I do have a few questions that I'd like to address. You take an opportunity to address. What actions, and you hit a number of them through your talk, are we taking to advance the implementation of the 2030 agenda here in Canada?
Yeah, it's great. So, I mean, as you and many will know, Agenda 2030 is an agenda that is for the whole world. And so it's both about domestic application as well as international. And so my colleague at ESDC in Canada, I believe it's ESDC, is also working on monitoring the implementation of the goals here in Canada. So in 2018, we provided about $50 million to establish a Sustainable Development Goals unit at ESDC to fund monitoring and reporting by Statistics Canada to measure progress effectively. And then through our Feminist International Assistance Policy, we're also tracking the results of our investments internationally. Of course, with COVID-19, we're seeing some big setbacks in achieving Agenda 2030, but Canada's very committed to both advancing this agenda here at home and around the world.
Thank you for that answer. And again, I think I liked how you worded in that there's engagement across like Statistics Canada and others to help us with the measurements. That gets to one of the other things that is a point that I'd like to ask again is, what are the gaps and challenges in measuring our progress here in Canada? on the Sustainable Development Goals and those indicators?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think part of it is really about communicating Agenda 2030 to the broader Canadian public. I mean, Statistics Canada is going to be looking at those measurements, and in 2018, Canada presented our first national voluntary report to the United Nations. But I think it's also about building awareness at all levels of government, so federal, provincial, and municipal. I know a lot of municipal governments that have fully embraced Agenda 2030 and are working on implementation within their own communities. But I think that it's about, reaching out to kind of every sector so that everyone is on board with Agenda 2030. And, whereas we're perhaps further towards, achieving Agenda 2030 than maybe some other countries around the world, we still have work to do to realize its objectives. And so I think education and advocacy and knowledge about Agenda 2030 is important, so that way we can work right across society to achieve its objectives.
Thank you. I have a question related to how is Canada ensuring that the post-COVID-19 recovery is incorporating the feminist perspective in a meaningful fashion?
Yeah, it's another really good question, Dr. Webb. And I mean, our feminist international assistance policy has gender equality, inclusion, intersectionality built into it right from the get-go, so that as we're looking at new projects to fund and new endeavors to take on, that we're making sure that we're taking that intersectional approach right from the get-go. And as we are experiencing here in Canada, we talk about the She Session and the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had disproportionately on women and girls. And that is true right across the world. Women are bearing the brunt of the pandemic when it comes to paid and unpaid care, when it comes to, representing over 75% of frontline healthcare workers right around the world. In Canada, it's even higher. It's over 80% of frontline healthcare workers that are women. So building in their needs and their experiences is really important, both when we're thinking about our response on the health side of things, but also when we're looking towards economic recovery, to make sure that as we want to, and are pursuing this concept of building back better, or I like to say rebuilding better, because we don't want to go backwards, we want to go forwards, is that we're building gender equality, inclusion, intersectionality considerations into those projects as we go forward.
Thank you so much for that answer, and I can't agree more with the need to be deliberate and intentional about that build forward and that inclusion. It's so critical. How can the international education community help governments in the private sector to advance the Sustainable Development Goals and reduce gender disparity in vulnerable and marginalized communities caused by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I think that the international education community has such an important role to play. I mean, first of all, as key members of civil society, to raise awareness, but also to hold governments and corporations and those in positions of power to account for the actions and decisions that we're taking. I mean, I think the research power that the Academy holds is so important for looking at the work that we're doing to really make sure that we're making the right decisions, and to provide us with the data and the evidence that will help enable us to make better decisions. And then also to raise awareness as to what the issues are that are ongoing around the world, and to learn lessons from what we did in the past and to apply those as we move forward. And I think particularly when it comes to the economic recovery and the health recovery from COVID-19, is to think specifically about the role of education. At one point in the spring, 1.5 billion children around the world were out of school. And here in Ontario, most children are still, learning remotely at home. And there are challenges in Canada to remote education. Now think about that in a place where there isn't internet connectivity, where people don't have access to technology at home. And so what does continuity of education look like throughout stay-at-home orders? But then more importantly, how do you get this generation of children back into a school setting? And I think, working with, education partners on how we do that is going to be really critical moving forward, because it's going to be essential for the recovery, but most importantly for the recovery of those students. We know, the Malala Fund is estimating that, there are going to be 10 million girls who don't go back to school because they've been out of school for so long, because schools have been closed or they've been working from home. They're estimating, high numbers of child and early forced marriage because of girls not being in school. And then there's going to be girls and boys who won't go back to school because they have now had to enter the labor market, perhaps informally, to help, keep food on the table at home. And so I think our education partners are going to play such a pivotal role working with us and the Government of Canada and the international community as we work through these issues and challenges and try to find solutions that really will support this generation of learners.
Thank you. And again, in some ways, that those numbers are absolutely staggering when you place them in a global scale. And interestingly enough, they even resonate on a personal level as well. Again, the opportunity for ensuring that we can continue and accelerate education. Thank you for that response. One thing that's important to the Global Institute for Food Security, and it's our mission, is really to work with partners to help develop and discover innovative solutions for global food security. How can Canadian institutions and multi-sectorial partnerships evolve to meet these grand global challenges that are threatening humanity?
It's a terrific question. And I mean, really the only way to meet these challenges and find solutions is through partnership. And so I really do commend, GIFTS for the work that you're already undertaking. I know that, Mr. Fisher is going to speak about some of that work very shortly, but I think that's the key, is working together. It's, working both with, researchers and academics, but also industry, but most importantly, working with local communities as well to understand what their needs are and what would be most effective for them. Because I think at the end of the day, it's also about sustainability. It's about resilience and, making sure that that is coming through at the local level, and that there's ownership from local communities is very important. I spoke a little bit about the markets initiative that we've been working on, but through even before, but particularly through the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of work with organizations like IFAD or the FAO on building resilience and sustainability within agricultural practices, making sure that market access continues. And so, making sure that we continue to expand and strengthen relationships and partnerships is so very important to address issues of food security. And one of the things that we saw, and we are continuing to see throughout the pandemic, is huge challenges and exacerbations of food security situations. On the one hand, because of a lack of inputs, because markets closed down, and local farmers maybe miss the planting season, and then how do you recoup that, and how do you build resilience into that? So I think the work that your institute is doing is just so vital, to address and hopefully solve some of these really pernicious challenges.
Thank you. And another question related to partnerships and collaborations is, as you during your address and also during many of the answers to our discussion, our Q&A session, you've talked about partnerships. How can we incentivize collaboration to ensure that our actions complement meaningful partnerships to address these colossal challenges?
It's another really good question, and one that I think we've been trying to work at Global Affairs, because sometimes the way we operate, I think, incentivizes more competition within the sector than it does collaboration. And so really, trying to think about, okay, we've got some really fantastic actors in different parts of the country in different sectors, be it NGO, be it academia, be it the private sector. How can we incentivize, cross-pollination and working together to address these challenges? And then also working with partners in different parts of the world as well to make sure that we're doing that kind of, cross-pollination that is really interesting. So we're doing a lot of that internal thinking right now. So I'm always open to ideas and suggestions, because, as we've been talking about through this conversation, it's so important to have those partnerships with a diverse array of actors to really tackle all sides of an issue, because you hear different perspectives, you learn about different needs, you learn about different barriers. And so how can we really break down those barriers and incentivize that collaboration? So we're certainly trying to think through that within our own funding mechanisms at Global Affairs. And so I'm certainly keen to hear any ideas that you or others might have.
Terrific. And thank you for reminding us all about that. The diversity of perspective is so important, essential to take on these huge challenges. Multilateralism is an essential component of international education. How can higher education institutes strengthen collective efforts to deliver quality education, so Sustainable Development Goal 4, to displaced and vulnerable populations who are often left behind?
Another really good question, and I think again it's through partnerships. So the Government of Canada partners with organizations like the Global Partnership for Education or Education Cannot Wait, with UNICEF and UNESCO, and the IDRC, the International Development Research Council in Canada, and with a number of partnerships, both NGO and institutions, academic institutions, to really think through this and work together. And I think that education was often kind of left behind, when it came to development, but particularly humanitarian responses. And I think you're seeing a coalescing now, really kind of starting with Canada's G7 leadership in Charlevoix to, put a spotlight on education, particularly for girls. And now, working to see what else we can do for refugee and displaced children. I had a really, interesting conversation with Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner of UNHCR, back at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were talking about how we ensure continuity of education for refugee and displaced children. And he reminded me that for many refugee and displaced children, they weren't even in school to begin with. And so we still have a ways to go in ensuring access to education for everyone, so that truly is universal. But then also making sure that there's that quality to education as well. And, I think that's something that Canada is very interested and focused on, and I'll have a bit more to say on that in the coming days. Great.
Well, Minister Gould, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to participate in our conference. And again, I want to personally thank you for the opportunity to have a brief meet and greet before we got on the stage. And I really, really did enjoy your comments, and the Q&A was fantastic. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to participate at our event.
Thank you to Minister Gould, and thank you, Stephen, for asking Minister Gould those very pertinent and important questions about how Canada as a nation is implementing the SDGs and harnessing the power of partnerships to advance the UN 2030 agenda.